Welcome back to the deep dive. It's really great to have you here with us. We are about to wade into some waters that on the surface might look a little bit, well, beige.
Beige. That's an interesting choice of color for today's topic.
You know exactly what I mean. We're talking about zoning codes, rental yields, municipal regulations, you know, square footage minimums.
Right.
It's the kind of stuff that usually gets filed away under dry policy debates, or maybe things I panic about once a month when the rent check clears. It feels like homework.
I get that. It feels like the kind of thing you pay someone else to worry about.
Yeah.
Until you realize you're the one paying for it.
Exactly. But the more I looked at the stack of research we have for today, the reports from the Council of Economic Advisors, the case studies from Vienna to Mexico, the architectural critiques, the more I realized this isn't just about money.
No.
It's practically the theory of everything for how our daily lives actually function.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, when you pull on the thread labeled housing, you end up unraveling the entire fabric of society. You hit transportation immediately.
Immediately.
You hit public health, you hit education quality, environmental impact, and even the most finite resource we have, our time.
That's the kicker for me. It dictates who gets to live where, how long you sit in a car every single day, and fundamentally who has access to opportunity and who is, locked out.
Yeah, absolutely.
It determines if you can walk your kids to school or if you have to put them on a bus for an hour.
And the scale of this is just, it's hard to overstate. We aren't just talking about expensive apartments in Manhattan or London. We are talking about a global structural failure.
So here's the mission for today. We are going to peel back the layers of this word affordable, because right now that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting that the math simply doesn't support.
Not at all.
Globally, we're looking at 1.6 billion people living in inadequate housing.
And to bring that closer to home for the U.S. audience, we're looking at a system where income simply has not kept pace with costs. I mean, we've reached a point where half of all renters are what economists call cost-burdened.
Which is a polite, very sanitized way of saying they are broke because of their landlord.
Essentially. It means they're making trade-offs between rent and food or rent and medicine. But the goal of this deep dive isn't just to, admire the problem.
Right.
We want to understand the mechanics of it, the intersection of urban planning, economics, human rights. We're going to look at why it's broken, and then we're going to look at the architectural and policy solutions that are actually working.
But before we get into the solution, we have to appreciate the absurdity of the problem. I want to start with a number from the research that it stopped me dead in my tracks. It's from a study mentioned in The Atlantic regarding San Francisco.
Oh, I know the one you mean. This is the Right to Build study. This is a crucial piece of economic detective work.
It blew my mind. We often assume houses are expensive because, well, land is finite and expensive, or because bricks and glass and labor cost money.
And those do play a role. I mean, you can't ignore material costs. Lumber prices fluctuate, labor shortages are real.
Sure. But this study tried to isolate the cost of the bureaucracy itself, not buying the land, not paying the construction crew, not buying a single 2x4.
It's just the paperwork.
Just the cost of permissions, red tape, delays, and fees. The study found that this right to build adds approximately $600,000 to the price tag of a single house.
Let that sit for a second. $600,000.
That is the price of a very nice house in almost any other part of the world. In the Midwest, that's a mansion. And in San Francisco, that amount of money buys you nothing.
Nothing physical.
It buys you a permission slip.
It creates no physical structure. It provides no utility. It's essentially a scarcity tax. It is the cost of navigating a system that is, frankly, designed to say no. It is the monetized value of meetings, environmental impact reports that get challenged, neighborhood reviews, and just the sheer time value of money while a project sits in limbo for years.
So keep that $600,000 figure in the back of your mind as we go through this. That is the invisible weight hanging over this entire conversation. But let's start with the basics. Let's talk about the math of affordability.
Okay.
When we say a place is affordable, is there actually a scientific definition, or is it just, a vibe?
There is a definition, but it's a bit of a blunt instrument. The gold standard in the U.S. and Canada is the 30% rule.
Okay, walk us through that.
It's pretty simple on paper. Housing is considered affordable if it costs less than 30% of your gross household income.
Gross, so before taxes.
Before taxes, yes.
Yeah.
And that includes your rent or your mortgage, plus your utilities like heat and water.
30%. It seems so neat and tidy. But where did that specific number come from? Was it brought down from a mountain on stone tablets by an economist?
Hardly. It's actually been a moving target historically. If you look back at Canada in the 1950s, the rule was 20%.
20%? That sounds like a dream. Imagine keeping 80% of your paycheck.
It does, doesn't it? Then it crept up to 25%, and by the 1980s, it settled at 30%.
So it's not a law of physics?
No, it's just a reflection of what we've collectively decided to tolerate. In India, for comparison, lenders often use a 40% rule.
So we've just slowly accepted that we should pay more and more of our paycheck for a roof over our heads. It's like the boiling frog experiment, but with our bank accounts.
That's the trend line. And while 30% is a useful baseline for banks to decide if you're a risk, it is deeply flawed when you try to apply it to real people's lives.
Why?
Because it looks at housing in a vacuum.
Great. It assumes that if you pay 30% for your house, the other 70% of your income is just free to do whatever. But life doesn't work that way.
Not at all.
The location of the house dictates how you spend the rest of that money.
Exactly. It completely ignores the interaction between where you live and your second biggest expense.
Which, for most Americans, is the car.
Transportation.
Yeah.
And this is where the data gets really, really interesting. There's an index developed by the Center for Neighborhood Technology called the H+T Affordability Index.
H+T, housing plus transportation.
Exactly. They are arguing you can't separate the two, and they are right. You cannot separate where you live from how you get around.
I mean, think about it. If you find a chic apartment, let's say it's $800 a month, but it's 50 miles from your job and nowhere near a bus line.
That's it.
Great. No, my rent is low, but my gas bill is astronomical, and my car maintenance goes through the roof because I'm putting 20,000 miles a year on it.
Precisely. And the data bears this out. It's not just a gut feeling. If you look at U.S. neighborhoods using just that standard 30% rule for housing costs, about 55% of neighborhoods look affordable.
Okay.
They pass the test.
Slightly more than half. That's not great, but it's not catastrophic. It sounds manageable.
Right. But if you factor in transportation costs alongside housing costs, using a 45% threshold for the combined two, that number drops from 55% to 26%.
Wow. Hold on. So nearly 30% of neighborhoods are what? Fake affordable?
That is a great way to put it. They are affordable only if you never leave the house. Once you factor in the commute, the model shows that you effectively eliminate nearly 60,000 neighborhoods from being truly affordable.
60,000.
And this explains that phenomenon known as drive till you qualify.
Drive till you qualify. I've heard this phrase. It sounds like a bleak reality show title.
It's the standard operating procedure for the American middle class. It's the idea that you keep driving away from the city center.
Away from the jobs, the culture, the density.
Until the bank says, okay, at this distance, the house prices have dropped enough that your income qualifies for the mortgage.
So you get the house, you get the mortgage, but you've just signed yourself up for a 2-hour commute each way.
And people often fail to calculate that the long commute eats up all the financial savings they made on the house price. It's a classic trap.
It has to be.
You save, say, $200 on the mortgage payment, but you spend $300 on gas, tires, and vehicle depreciation. You're actually poorer.
Not to mention the time cost. That's the hidden tax on your life, isn't it?
That's the one you can't get back.
If you're spending 2 hours a day in a car, that's 10 hours a week. You aren't working, aren't with your family, aren't sleeping, you aren't exercising.
It's a massive degradation of quality of life that doesn't show up on a bank spreadsheet. It also disconnects you from your community. If you leave at 6 a.m. and get back at 7 p.m., you aren't volunteering, you aren't going to the PTA meeting.
You're just sleeping there.
You are. You're just a resident, not a neighbor.
So the 30% rule is flawed because it ignores location and transportation. Are there other ways to measure this that make more sense?
There are a few. The World Bank and the UN use something called the median multiple. This is more of a macroeconomic view.
Okay, how does that work?
You just divide the median house price in a city by the gross annual median household income. So it's a ratio.
Simple division.
Right. It's a broad stroke to see if a market is healthy. A balanced market means a median income family can afford a median house. Historically, that ratio was around 3 to 1.
3 years of income to buy a house? That seems reasonable.
It was. But in places like Sydney, Vancouver, or Hong Kong today, that ratio can be 10, 15, or even 20 to 1.
20 to 1, which just confirms that the market is broken. It basically says you need to work for 20 years just to pay the principal, ignoring interest.
Exactly. It's a good diagnostic tool for a sick market, but it doesn't really help the individual renter figure out their budget.
So what does?
For the individual, I prefer the residual income approach. This is used in Australia, and it's very, Well, it's very human-centric.
How does that work?
It flips the equation. Instead of saying you can spend X% on housing, it says, housing is affordable if, after paying for it, you still have enough money left over for basic necessities.
Like food, healthcare, and education.
Exactly. That feels much more grounded in reality, because percentages can be really deceiving depending on how much you make.
Right. If I make $1 million a year and I spend 50% on a penthouse, I'm technically cost burdened.
By the percentage definition, yes.
But I still have $500,000 left for groceries. I'm going to be fine. I'm burdened on paper, but I'm rich in reality.
But if I make, say, $20,000 a year and spend 30% on housing, that's $6,000. I have $14,000 left for the entire year, for everything.
That might not be enough to feed your kids.
Precisely.
Oh.
The percentage impacts people differently at different income levels. A strict 30% rule hits the poor much harder than the rich. The residual income approach forces policymakers to look at the actual cost of living, not just a ratio.
There is one more nuance to the math I want to touch on from the notes. We often lump renters and owners together when we talk about these cost burdens, but the economic reality is different, isn't it?
Oh, it is night and day. If a homeowner is burdened, say, they're paying 40% of their income into a mortgage, they are certainly cash poor. They might be eating ramen noodles.
For sure.
But they are building equity. That money is technically still theirs.
Right. It's just locked up in drywall and land. It's a forced savings plan.
Whereas a renter who is burdened is simply losing that income. It's gone. It dissolves. So the long-term impact of that affordability crisis is much more severe for renters than for owners, even if the monthly balance sheet looks similar.
The owner comes out the other side with an asset. The renter comes out with nothing.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established the math is messy, the 30% rule is a bit of a lie, and transportation is the silent killer of budgets. But let's get to the why. Why is it so expensive? We touched on the $600,000 price tag for permission in San Francisco. That brings us to the economics of scarcity.
At its core, yes, it is supply and demand. But whenever someone says just build more houses, they are missing the complexity of supply.
It's not just about whether there are enough bricks or enough construction workers.
No, it is about land value and, crucially, over-regulation.
This is where we get back to that right to build. You mentioned the Harvard and Atlantic Monthly study earlier. Can we dig a little deeper into how they actually calculate that? I mean, how do you put a price tag on bureaucracy?
It's a fascinating methodology. The economists, Edward Glaser and Christina Tobayo, they looked at the cost of single-family homes on quarter-acre lots versus half-acre lots.
Okay.
By comparing those, they could figure out the marginal land price, basically what is a square foot of the land itself actually worth.
So they isolate the land value. They separate the dirt from the house.
Exactly. Then they look at the construction costs, labor and materials. So let's say the land is worth $100,000 and the construction costs $200,000. Theoretically, in a free market, the house should sell for roughly $300,000, maybe a bit more for developer profit.
Makes sense. Costs plus margin equals price.
But if that house is selling for $900,000, that massive gap, that extra $600,000, is the cost of the regulatory tax. It represents the scarcity created by the government's refusal to let people build. It is the premium people are willing to pay just to get into a market where supply is artificially capped.
That is wild. It's an invisible markup. It's money you pay for the absence of housing supply.
And a huge part of this comes down to zoning, right?
A huge part.
I feel like zoning is one of those words that makes people's eyes glaze over, but it seems to be the villain in this story.
It often is. I mean, the zoning laws were originally created to keep loud factories away from quiet homes. That makes sense. We don't want a tannery next to a kindergarten.
Of course not.
But over the last century, they have morphed into a tool of exclusion.
Give us an example of a zoning rule that hurts affordability.
Okay, take minimum size requirements. Many cities have laws mandating that a housing unit must be at least, say, 400 square feet.
Right.
Or they limit how many unrelated people can live together in a single unit.
Which sounds like they are trying to ensure quality of life, right? The argument is usually, we don't want people living in shoeboxes. That is the stated intent. But the result is that you effectively outlaw the bottom end of the private market. If you cannot legally build a small, cheap unit, you simply don't build it.
You build a luxury unit instead.
Build a luxury unit instead. Because that's the only way to make the math work with those size constraints. It forces people who would have rented a small 200-square-foot studio into a much more expensive market.
Or worse.
Or worse, onto the street.
It's like saying, to prevent hunger, we are banning the sale of any food cheaper than a steak dinner.
That is a perfect analogy. You aren't ensuring everyone eats steak. You're ensuring a lot of people starve because they can't buy a sandwich.
By banning the bad housing, you don't magically create good housing.
You create no housing for that segment of the market.
And then there's the issue of parking. I read this in the notes and I couldn't believe it. The cost of a parking spot.
Oh, parking requirements are the silent budget killer. A 2021 study in California found that parking requirements, mandating that developers build a certain number of spots per unit,
Per apartment, yeah.
added up to $75,000 per unit in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco.
$75,000 just to house a Toyota Camry. That's more than the car is worth.
Think about the geometry of it. A parking spot is about 300 square feet once you include the drive aisles. That is bigger than some studio apartments in other countries.
So we are prioritizing housing for cars over housing for humans. We are literally giving the cars more square footage than some of the residents.
Explicitly, and that cost gets passed directly to the renter or buyer. It forces developers to use valuable land for cars. If you didn't have to build that parking garage, you could have built another floor of apartments.
It creates a direct competition between housing cars and housing humans.
And in many U.S. cities, the cars are winning.
And this regulatory stranglehold doesn't just make rent expensive for millennials with good jobs, it pushes people off the bottom rung entirely.
It does.
This leads us to the most visible and heartbreaking symptom of this crisis: homelessness.
It does. And it is important to view this as a spectrum. Affordability isn't binary. It is a continuum. At one end, you have homeownership, then market rental, then social housing, transitional housing, emergency shelters, and finally, homelessness.
It's a funnel, or maybe a ladder with missing rungs at the bottom.
Exactly. When you squeeze the top of that funnel with high costs and regulations, people get pushed down, rung by rung, until they fall out of the bottom.
We have a report here from the Council of Economic Advisors, The State of Homelessness in America, published in 2019. It gives us a snapshot of the crisis just before the pandemic reshaped everything.
Right. And the numbers were already stark. On a single night in the U.S., over 500,000 people were homeless.
500,000.
And almost 47% of all unsheltered people were in California.
That geographic concentration is interesting. It challenges the idea that homelessness is evenly distributed. The report breaks down 4 main drivers of homelessness. Let's run through them because I think they bust some myths.
Okay.
The first one is exactly what we've been talking about.
Housing price and regulation. The report actually ran a simulation. They calculated that if you deregulated the housing markets in 11 of the most constrained cities, places like San Francisco, Boston, NYC homelessness would drop significantly.
How significant?
In San Francisco, the estimated deregulation alone could drop homelessness by 54%.
54%. That is a massive number. It suggests that homelessness isn't just about mental health or drug addiction. It's largely a math problem. There just aren't enough places to be.
Precisely. If you create more supply at the lower end, people don't fall off the ladder. But the second driver complicates things. Climate.
This explains the California statistic.
It does. Warmer cities have higher unsheltered rates. Not necessarily higher homeless rates overall, but higher unsheltered rates.
Because if it's 20 degrees below zero in Chicago, you find a shelter or you die. If it's 60 degrees in Los Angeles, sleeping outside is physically survivable.
Exactly. It affects the tolerability of being unsheltered. It doesn't mean weather causes homelessness. People are homeless in cold cities too. But it dictates where the homeless are most visible.
Okay.
Then there is the third driver, which is a bit of a paradox: shelter supply.
This one is controversial from what I've read.
It is. Places like New York City and Massachusetts have a legal right to shelter.
Meaning the government is legally obligated to provide a bed if you ask for one.
Yes. And the report suggests, and this is their argument, not ours, that because the quality of these shelters is higher, with guaranteed beds and certain standards, they can become a viable substitute for housing for some people.
Wait, so the argument is if you make shelters too nice, people will choose them over renting. That seems harsh.
The economic argument is about substitution. If the shelter is safer and cleaner than the cheapest available, dangerous, illegal basement apartment, a rational person might choose the shelter.
Okay, I see.
Paradoxically, this can keep the demand for low-end market housing lower and shelter usage higher. It's a very difficult policy needle to thread because obviously you want shelters to be humane.
Right, you don't want to make shelters terrible just to force people into apartments they can't afford. But we can't talk about homelessness without talking about the human element, the fourth driver.
Individual factors. This is mental health and substance abuse. The data shows that about 20% of the homeless population has a severe mental illness, and 16% suffer from chronic substance abuse. Weak social ties are also a huge factor.
But here's the nuance that I think gets lost in the public debate. The vast majority of people with mental illness or addiction are not homeless.
Correct. That is a critical point. They have families where they have cheap apartments, or they live in areas where the rent is $500 a month. They become homeless when you combine those vulnerabilities with a housing market that is too expensive to navigate.
It's a force multiplier. If rent was $300, you might be able to scrape by even with a struggle. If rent is $3,000, you crash out.
Exactly. High rents remove the margin for error in people's lives. You lose your job, or you have a medical episode, and because the floor is so high, you fall right through it.
Now, we focused a lot on the U.S., but this is a global deep dive. We mentioned 1.6 billion people earlier. We have to look at the developing world.
We have to talk about slums. In the developing world, the affordability crisis looks different. It doesn't always show up as homelessness. It manifests as informal settlements.
The notes mention the world's largest slum, Nezahualcóyotl in Mexico.
It houses nearly 4 million people.
4 million. That's larger than the population of Chicago. That's a metropolis.
It is a city within a city. And these form because of rural to urban migration. People move to cities for jobs. That's a global constant. But the legal housing market is completely out of reach.
You can't afford it.
So they build their own. They squat on land and build with whatever they can find.
Cinder blocks, corrugated metal, scrap wood.
And over time, these settlements become semi-permanent. They steal electricity from the grid, they truck in water. But the projection is what is truly terrifying.
What is it?
By 2030, 1 in 4 people on Earth will live in a slum or informal settlement.
That is a statistic that needs to sit with us. 1 in 4 people. It really highlights that this isn't just a policy failure or a zoning issue. It's a humanitarian crisis on a planetary scale.
It is. And it connects back to the labor market. If workers cannot afford to live near the work, the economy suffocates, whether that's a barista in San Francisco or a factory worker in Mexico City.
The city is an engine.
And housing is the fuel. If you run out of fuel, the engine stops.
Okay, we've laid out the problem. It's expensive, it's regulated to death, it's hurting millions, and it's global. I want to pivot to solutions.
Good.
If regulations are the problem, can design be the fix? Can we build our way out of this with clever architecture?
There are definitely architectural movements trying to hack the system. If you look at the U.S. landscape recently, you might have noticed a very specific type of building popping up everywhere.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
They're usually 5 stories tall, look a bit boxy, maybe have different colored panels on the outside.
They feel like they're built out of Lego blocks. They are everywhere in every mid-sized city. They all look kind of the same.
Those are called 5-over-1s. The name refers to the construction style. 5 stories of wood framing sitting on top as a 1-story concrete podium.
And the podium usually has parking or a Chipotle in it?
Usually retail or parking, yes. The reason these are everywhere is that they are a code hack.
A code hack. Explain that.
Well, international building codes change to allow wood frame construction up to a certain height, usually about 5 or 6 stories, as long as you have sprinklers and fire safety measures.
Okay.
By putting the wood on a concrete pedestal, developers can maximize density without having to build with steel and glass.
Because steel and glass are expensive, wood is cheap.
Exactly. It allows them to hit a sweet spot of density and cost. It's not the most beautiful architecture in history. Architects often hate them, calling them fast casual architecture. But it is incredibly effective at creating supply.
It's the Honda Civic of apartment buildings. Reliable, everywhere, gets the job done.
And right now, we need reliable transportation, not Ferraris. We need units.
What about reusing old buildings? I love the idea of turning an old factory into lofts. It feels very romantic.
Adaptive reuse. This is huge. The greenest building is the one that is already built. We have all these underused structures, old factories, and now especially empty office buildings and motels.
Right. The post-pandemic office apocalypse, we have all these empty glass towers. Can we live in them?
It's harder than it sounds. Plumbing is a nightmare in office buildings because the bathrooms are all in the center core.
Oh, right.
Whereas apartments need bathrooms in every unit.
Mm-hmm.
But it is scaling up. There's a forecast that suggests 90% of U.S. real estate growth by 2033 will involve adaptive reuse.
90%. That is a complete takeover.
It makes sense. We have a surplus of retail space and office space and a shortage of housing. In Los Angeles, for example, they passed legislation allowing motels to be converted into affordable housing regardless of the zoning.
That is smart. Motels already have plumbing in every room. They're basically studio apartments already.
Exactly. It bypasses that right to build cost we talked about because the building already exists. It's a massive shortcut.
I saw a note here about a soap factory in Brussels.
Yes, a great example. An architectural firm took an old soap factory and turned it into a mix of lofts, studios, and massive six-bedroom apartments. It's energy efficient, it preserved the history, and it added density to the city without knocking anything down.
And it gives the city character, which those 5/1s sometimes lack.
It does.
I have to ask about shipping containers. I feel like 10 years ago, every design blog was saying we'd all be living in shipping containers by now. Is that still a thing?
It's complicated. The cool factor is high. It looks industrial and chic. But the reality is that standard shipping containers are metal boxes.
Which means they turn into ovens in the summer and freezers in the winter.
Correct. They are terrible at temperature control. By the time you insulate them, cut holes for windows, which compromises their structural integrity so you have to reinforce them, you often haven't saved much money compared to just building a normal wall.
So it's more of an aesthetic choice than a practical solution.
Often, yes. However, there is a subcategory called reefer containers refrigerated units.
Like the ones they ship bananas in.
Yes. They already have insulation in the walls, ceilings, and floors. Those are much more viable for housing because they solve the thermal problem right out of the gate.
Interesting. Reefer housing. I'm sure the marketing team can work on the name.
Small F. Perhaps chilled living might work. But aside from the materials, we need to talk about the type of housing. We have a problem called the missing middle.
This is the idea that we build single-family homes on one side and giant skyscrapers on the other and nothing in between.
Exactly. We have illegalized the middle. Think of the triple-deckers in New England. 3 floors, 3 families. Or duplexes, row houses, cottage courts.
The stuff that makes old neighborhoods feel cozy and walkable.
These used to be the backbone of affordable housing. But zoning laws in the mid-20th century largely banned them in favor of single-family sprawl.
Bringing those back seems like a no-brainer. It fits into existing neighborhoods without changing the character too much.
It increases density gently. You aren't dropping a 40-story tower in the suburbs, you're just adding a duplex. It blends in.
I also love the self-built concept mentioned in the notes, the Tasmanian house.
Yes, this is a project in Australia. It's a low-tech approach. They provide manuals for owners to build their own homes using local materials.
So it's DIY housing.
It's affordable because you are substituting your own labor for the cost of a construction crew. It empowers people to solve their own housing needs. It's a return to how we used to do things before housing became a specialized industry.
It's like IKEA furniture, but for your entire life.
Ideally with fewer leftover screws at the end.
Let's hope. Okay, so we have the math, the economics, the human cost, and the design ideas. But none of this happens without the rules changing. Let's talk about policy.
The big one.
What actually works? Because whenever anyone mentions housing success stories, one city always comes up, Vienna.
The Vienna model. It is the gold standard for a reason.
Why? What are they doing that we aren't?
In Vienna, housing is not seen as a commodity first. It is seen as a right. About 46% of the city's housing stock is either government-owned or part of a public-private partnership.
Almost half the city. That is wildly different from the U.S. model.
But the key difference isn't just the percentage. It's the philosophy. In the U.S. or U.K., public housing is often housing of last resort. It's stigmatized.
Right.
It's where you go when you have failed in the private market.
It's the projects. It's concentrated poverty.
Exactly. In Vienna, it is desirable. Doctors and lawyers live next to factory workers. It is mixed income. The architecture is beautiful. Some of it looks like a palace.
So they removed the stigma by making it high quality and available to the middle class, not just the poor.
Exactly. When the middle class lives there, the political will to maintain the quality stays high because the voters live there. It's not something you do for them. It's something you do for us.
That's a crucial point. If only the poor use a service, the service tends to get cut. If the middle class uses it, it gets funded.
Singapore does something similar. Citizens across a huge income range live in public housing. They call them HDB flats.
Yeah.
It is a mainstream tenure choice, not a safety net. You aren't looked down upon for living in public housing. It's the norm.
So that seems to be the secret sauce universality. What about Germany? I see notes here on Hamburg and Berlin.
They rely heavily on public-private partnerships. Hamburg has this fascinating agreement where developers commit to building a certain number of units, say 3,500 a year. But 30% of them must be for low or middle-income households.
That's inclusionary zoning. If you want to build your luxury tower, you have to build for the teachers and nurses too.
Yes, And the city helps by providing the land or simplifying the regulations. It's a deal. It's not adversarial. In Berlin, they formed an alliance for housing construction, involving private landlords and public utilities to agree on targets.
It's about getting everyone at the table rather than fighting in court.
Exactly.
Now, bringing it back to the U.S., we've seen some shifts. So we talked about homelessness earlier. There was a mention of the housing first approach. Can you explain that?
Housing first is a major policy shift. For a long time, the model was treatment first. You had to get sober or get on medication before you earned housing.
Which seems incredibly hard to do if you are sleeping under a bridge and keeping your shoes on so they don't get stolen.
Exactly. It's almost impossible. Housing first flips it. It says you can't solve a person's mental health or addiction issues while they're surviving on the street. You give them the housing first, without preconditions, and then offer services.
Stabilize the chaos, then treat the problem.
Right. Although it is worth noting that during the Trump administration, there were reforms to this approach that allowed communities to impose service participation requirements.
Essentially saying, we will help you, but you need to engage with the recovery process.
It brought a different philosophy to the table regarding accountability versus unconditional support. It's an ongoing debate in policy circles about which method yields better long-term results.
And we had some temporary relief during COVID, right? The emergency housing vouchers.
Yes. The EHV program was a lifeline during the pandemic. It showed that when the government puts money on the table, we can house people. But as per HUD announcements, that funding is set to end by 2026.
So we are facing a cliff.
We are. And if that support disappears, it could exacerbate the crisis we discussed earlier. It's a real moment of reckoning for U.S. housing policy.
But there is some hope on the grassroots level. We are seeing the rise of the YMBYs.
Yes, in my backyard.
The counter movement to NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Exactly. The YMBYs are a coalition of people, often younger, who are pushing for upzoning. They are the ones showing up to city council meetings saying, please build this.
And they argue that we need to build more of everything, everywhere, to lower prices for everyone. They are fighting those parking minimums and height limits.
They're trying to break the scarcity model. It's a fascinating generational battle, really.
The homeowners who want to preserve their neighborhood character versus the renters who just want a place to live.
And that conflict is where the future of our cities will be decided.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground here. We've gone from the 30% rule to the $600 K permitting costs to the slums of Mexico and the social palaces of Vienna. If we had to summarize this complexity for the learner, how do we wrap our heads around the solution?
I think the takeaway is that there is no silver bullet. You cannot just build more if the regulations make building impossible. You cannot just deregulate without protecting the vulnerable. It requires a silver buckshot approach.
A mix of everything.
Exactly. You need to deregulate land use fix, that right to build. You need better transportation so the H+T index works. You need innovation like adaptive reuse. And fundamentally, you need the political will to treat housing differently, like they do in Vienna.
And you mentioned earlier that this isn't just about charity, it's about the economy.
That's the expert's final takeaway here. Housing affordability creates what economists call labor market impediments.
Talk to us about that.
If your barista, your nurse, your teacher, and your firefighter cannot afford to live within 30 miles of your community, your local economy eventually breaks.
It grinds to a halt.
Businesses can't find workers. Schools can't find teachers. It is a public health issue, an education issue, and an economic survival issue. It reminds me of that saying, a city that pushes out its workers is a city that is dying.
It becomes a theme park for the rich, but it ceases to function as a city.
Precisely.
So we want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We've looked at all the data, but at the bottom of this deep dive is a philosophical question. Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that housing is a fundamental human right.
But our economic system treats it primarily as a commodity. It is an investment vehicle. It is a retirement plan.
And that is the tension. Can housing ever truly be affordable for everyone as long as we also expect it to be a high-yield investment for owners?
Can it be both a basic human right and a way to get rich?
It feels like those two goals are fundamentally at odds.
It's a question that requires us to rethink what a home is actually for. Is it a nest egg or is it a nest?
On that note, we encourage you to take a walk around your own neighborhood. Look at the empty lots, look at the parking garages, and look at the zoning. Once you see the matrix, you can't unsee it. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious.